A world created to be a perfect environment for perfect human beings is corrupted, polluted, and scarred by human sin. And our relationship with God, our Creator, is shattered. The consequences of sin fill the first 11 chapters of the Bible. But beginning in chapter 12 of Genesis, God begins the process of revelation and redemption that will not be completed until the New Testament arrival of Jesus Christ. Back in the last part of Genesis, God is fulfilling His covenant promises to the four patriarchs: Abraham, his son Isaac, his grandson Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, right? And finally Joseph. Joseph and his brothers and their families spend the next 400 years in Egypt, where they grow to be so numerous that the pharaohs force them into slavery to build their royal cities and pyramids that still exist today. I mean, imagine a nation enslaved for 400 years. No wonder the Israelites felt that God had forgotten the threefold covenant promise that He had made to the patriarchs: to give them the land of Canaan, to make them a great nation, and to bless the world through them. But God is not forgotten. He had arranged for one of the Israelites, also called Hebrews and later called Jews, to be adopted as Pharaoh's daughter and raised with all the knowledge and privilege of Egypt. Through this man, Moses, in about 1500 BC, God freed these enslaved people, humbling the Pharaoh and the Egyptians in the process, parting the Red Sea so that they can make a dry land escape, and then taking them to a mountain in the Sinai Peninsula, where He gave them instructions on how they were to live in this new promised land. These instructions included instructions about their courts, their farming, and their religious life, which would include various types of sacrifices. And these sacrifices would start to paint a picture for the world of the sacrifice that one day, more than 1,000 years later, would be made by God's own Son, Jesus Christ. So the first 5 books of the Bible take us from the time that God created the world up to the time of these descendants of the four patriarchs, when they finally entered the Promised Land. After the death of Moses, who had led them through a generation of wandering in the wilderness in the Sinai desert, his successor Joshua, whose story is found in the book of Joshua, leads the Israelites as a military as well as a spiritual leader. And they begin the long and not entirely successful process of claiming the land God had promised to them. For the next several hundred years, they are often at war with these Canaanite peoples who still lived in and around Israel, nations like the Hittites and the Philistines. And when Joshua dies, there's really no one to take his place. But when a crisis, like one of the neighboring nations attacking Israel, God would raise up a leader, a man or woman, who would temporarily rally the Israelites, pull together an army, and be equipped and used by God to bring the Hebrews a few years of peace. These temporary leaders are called judges, and the book of Judges tells the story of these leaders, like Gideon, Samson, and Deborah. One of the last of these judges was named Samuel, and the 2 books that bear his name pick up the next section of the Old Testament. So we've come from God's act of creation through the terrible consequences of disobedience and sin, to God's covenant promises to the 4 patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, whose name is changed to Israel, and Joseph. And we've seen how after 400 years of slavery in Egypt, God has brought them under Moses' leadership to the promised land, the land of Israel, where first led by Joshua, they fight to claim and to defend the land, often led by military and spiritual leaders called judges. So this brings us from Abraham at 2000 BC to the next huge change for Israel in 1000 BC. It's the time of the kings.